So my speech is going to consist of an animal disease kind of disadvantage and then go into some rebuttal and a little on the framework. So I'd like to start off by saying that most of his evidence is right. Trans-species testing sucks and it probably should be banned. However, the sector that deals with animal testing for the sake of other animals of the same species should be retained. When I'm talking about animal disease, I'm talking about things like cancer, genetic diseases, or diabetes. So for a resolution that's so animal focused, his arguments seem oddly anthropocentric. And this kind of mindset, under the guise of being helpful for animals, ensures continued animal abuse because even if we have a policy that's helpful for animals, maintaining motivations that disregard them will lead to the reemergence of violence against them. And the majority of his speech is centered around how awful it would be for humans to suffer if animals were being tested on and how cross species testing hurts humans. But what he failed to realize is that without animal testing, animals will be forced to be treated with solutions that work on humans, leading to devastation, like in the articles that he outlines. And I think that this is highly selfish and impractical. His PCRM evidence speaks to the fact that trans animal testing sucks. So it's probably a reason why we should be testing on animals that's intended for use animals within the same species. And without testing, where are we going to get treatment for animal diseases? Without proper experimentation, disease will proliferate, and I don't think that we should facilitate that. Humans have humans for testing, so why shouldn't animals have animals? It seems like a logical extension from his thinking. He doesn't introduce a moral argument in his first speech, so don't let him introduce one in the next. For an alternative, he offers in vitro testing, but that was in the context of what it would be helpful for humans and not animals, so it needs to be specific. And I'm pretty sure a dog's anatomy is more similar to other members of its own species rather than a test tube. So intra-species testing is probably the best bet. And there's no reason why he can't have these alternatives for the humans if he thinks that they're so great, but we still have to account for animal disease by not banning the specific section. So some rebuttal. He says that animal testing is not desirable. This is a weak argument at best. There's no impact to it. I think that studying for my test is less desirable, but I still do it because of the long-term benefits. And if scientists use it as a last resort and they're still using it, it sounds like a pretty important and integral part of the work that they do. This means that if we allow animal testing, then only a minimal amount of animals will be needed to be tested on, and there's potential for no animals to be tested on if scientists don't need it. His summary of the source reads as animal testing is used when it's really needed, but then he wants to ban it. This seems contradictory. He establishes that it's ethical because of the three R's, which means that the type of animal testing that I'm advocating for is ethical as per his standards. And his arguments about ineffectiveness only apply to trans species applications, which he perpetuates by not allowing animals to be tested on for the sake of other animals. And his entire contention 3 at best is irrelevant and at worst flows for me. So the alternatives that he offers, other than in kind of the test tube, are more likely alongside animal testing rather than true alternative. So one of the examples that he gives is mass spectrometry, and that's just used to identify proteins or small molecules by chopping it up and analyzing the fragments and comparing it to known fragments. And where did they think that these molecules come from? They most likely come from animals. And so no scientist in his right mind would expect an animal or animal body to be able to identify any random molecule. So mass spec isn't a replacement for animal testing. He should provide an example of what kind of test was eliminated because of this technology. It's most likely alongside animal testing. And another example he gives is genome mapping. So we need a genome in order to map it. So there's probably a prerequisite that we take blood or tissue from the animal whose genome we're trying to map. So it has origins in animal testing, and it's not an alternative, but just an extension of animal testing. And ultimately, you should judge us around on who does the most good for the most amount of living organisms. In his world, sure, the animals will have some kind of relief in the short term and won't be tested on, but that's only a small number of animals that are being tested on in the first place, as he points out. But with no animal for animal testing, we're not going to be able to eliminate animal diseases, which means in the long term, animals will suffer and die because they can't get species-specific treatment. There would also be the mindset that that's okay, furthering abuse on animals, and the potential for this otherization to manifest itself within the human community to a further extent across cultural lines with things like colonization and genocide, like we see in this quote. And in the world that I advocate, all the harms that he outlines that would happen to humans won't be there because no animals would be tested on for human sake. The speciesist mindset that he perpetuates throughout his advantages won't be there. And in the short term, maybe a couple of animals will have to undergo testing, but one, he says that it'll be ethical and used as a last resort, and two, it's for the good of the population, which would result in many, many more happy and healthy animals. And for all these reasons, I think that you should vote for the opposition.